Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Samantha's History Spotlight, where we talk all about the past and its influences. In this episode, titled Che Guevara, Inspirational Figure or Evil in Disguise, we'll be discussing the documentary, The True Story of Che Guevara, and how it connects to our past readings. This documentary is filled with information about Che Guevara and his role in Cuba's fight against imperialist powers, as well as his efforts to create a new political and social reality. It covers everything from his childhood to his final moments in Bolivia, showing the many journeys and missions he took throughout his life. Building on ideas that we learned from our textbook, the documentary highlights both Che's actions and his intentions over time, which leads to a lot of mixed opinions about him. While some people admire his dedication to fighting outside control, others view him as a violent and very controversial figure. Details of Che's beliefs were highlighted previously in the Cuban Revolution section of the book Born in Blood and Fire. Like the documentary, the book explains that Che felt a strong hatred towards imperialism and capitalistic powers, which helps explain his disgust with the United States. This feeling became even stronger during his trip to the Andes, where he saw firsthand the poverty and oppression indigenous communities were living in. An interesting point the documentary makes is that Che didn't actually grow up in poverty. He was really middle class and even graduated from medical school. His involvement with rebellious student groups, along with his experiences in the Andes, is what pushed him to act so strongly. I also thought it was really interesting that Che used his medical education to help his companions during his missions. As the documentary mentions, he treated injuries during battles, and just like me when I go to the doctor, his companions hated it. Let's just say Che wasn't very gentle, but he made sure they were good to go. Another connection between the book and the documentary is Che's relationship with Fidel Castro. As the book mentions, the two met in Mexico and bonded over their shared goal of eliminating U.S. influence. However, they didn't agree on everything. Che wanted a broader international movement that would free all of Latin America, while Castro was more focused on Cuba. Because of this, Che wasn't really satisfied with just overthrowing Fulgencio Batista. Instead, he wanted to take what he learned and apply it elsewhere. Both the book and the documentary mention his idea of starting smaller guerrilla movements, similar to the one that they had with the Grandma Ship, which could eventually spark liberation movements across the hemisphere. The documentary follows his attempts to do this in places like the Republic of the Congo and finally Bolivia. The documentary also shows why this plan didn't work. Unlike in Cuba, Che didn't have strong support from the peasants in Bolivia. Many already had land due to reforms and had certain rights, so they weren't as motivated to join a revolution. In fact, a peasant even betrayed part of his group, leading to an ambush that killed several members, like the popular Tanya. This weekend state is what ultimately led to his capture and eventually his death. Che and Castro also had differences when it came to economics. The book explains that while Castro cut off ties with the United States, Cuba became dependent on the Soviet Union instead. The documentary adds that Che recognized his dependence and wanted a more independent and radical approach. Because of these disagreements, Castro was ultimately okay with Che leaving Cuba and pursuing his own plans. All of this explains why Che is such a debated person. On one hand, some see him as inspirational and as someone who was willing to risk everything to fight for equality and stand up against oppression, not just in one country, but all over Latin America. On the other hand, the documentary highlights more of his flaws than the book does. It shows how Che carried out executions of supposed criminals through firing squads in Cuba, which reinforces the intimidating image that he had. This is a big reason why many people view him in a negative way. A great number of lives were lost and families experienced suffering, especially in cases where some may have been innocent. His reputation also has been shaped by stories of him always being the first to jump into battle, rarely showing any fear. Overall, both the book and the documentary portrayed Che Guevara as a brave individual who stood up for what he believed in and died trying. The information displayed in both pieces complement each other well and provide great detail. Some see him as someone who showed others it was possible to fight against powers that seemed unstoppable, while others saw him as someone who took things too far. Now, whether Che can be considered a hero is up to readers who hear his story and decide that for themselves.